What is up, Knicks fans? Welcome back to yet another episode of Fireside Knicks with your hosts, Dylan and Ryan. And today we're going to talk about perhaps the most coveted trade target of the summer, not just for the Knicks, but for every other team, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Is he going to come to the Knicks? Are the Knicks going to pull off a big trade for him? Now, if you ask me, I think it's a huge long shot. But we're going to talk about it today and really where I think the Knicks stand, what the chances are of them possibly making a trade for him, and if they should make a trade for him, because I know there are some fans who are kind of split on the idea of making such a humongous blockbuster just 1 year after making the Eastern Conference Finals. So Ryan, first off, tell me how you're doing, and secondly, what do you think about Giannis potentially coming here, and do you really think it's likely that he will be in New York come next season?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you, Dylan. Don't think that Giannis is going to be a Knick. And I think that a lot of that conversation is spurred by, number one, I think it's just popular to talk about Giannis and where he's going to go. Number two, the New York Knicks. I mean, the New York Knicks and the idea of acquiring Giannis. And number three, I think a lot of fans, as soon as the playoffs ended, were under the presumption that Cat is going to be gone. I think that was quickly formed by just how fast that Athletic article talking about Cat came out. And I won't lie, I felt the same way. I felt like, all right, the New York Knicks are going to do what they can to move Cat. And I believe that most New York Knicks fans would say that Giannis is one of the select players in the league that they would be comfortable unloading Cat for. And I'd also agree with that assessment. I think Giannis is one of the few exceptions where you'd go, yep, I'm going to trade Cat, and I'm comfortable doing it, and I have zero quarrels about it, and it's because it's Giannis Antetokounmpo that we're getting back. But I think it's all fantasy. I think it's all like this idealistic, yep, we're going to get exactly the player we want, the exact perfect situation. Giannis is going to demand that the New York Knicks are his only destination, which, number one, that's not going to happen. And number two, the Milwaukee Bucks they're actually a great team to look at as an example of just because a player expresses written or spoken interest in joining another team in a trade does not mean they're going to end up on that team. Damian Lillard, everyone was like, oh, he's just going to be in Miami Heat. And we spent basically an entire summer wondering when he was going to go to the Heat, whether that deal would get done. We knew Miami didn't have enough assets, and we were like, why is Portland not going out and shopping other offers? And he did not end up a Miami Heat. He ended up a Milwaukee Buck. Now, obviously, that deal hasn't turned out the way the Bucks have wanted it to. But I think it's far more likely that Giannis takes another year with the Bucks than it is that he ends up a New York Knick. And you look at the other suitors involved potentially. I mean, everyone in the NBA is going to have some level of interest, but the Spurs and OKC kind of strike me as teams that would have the most firepower to acquire him while also having like legitimate interest in him and having a roster that makes sense for Giannis. Dylan, I don't think it's even remotely reasonable to say that Giannis would force his way to the Knicks and the Bucks wouldn't consider taking the Spurs and Thunder offer. Giannis's wishes be damned. That's just, I think, crazy at this point to believe.
Yeah, I don't think he becomes a Knick either, and I'll explain why too. It's a lot of what you said, but also just because I don't think the Knicks are ready to just gut the entire roster for him just yet. I feel like on the surface there was some progress made this past season. Yes, it sucked that they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals to the same team that they lost in the second round to the year before. I get that, but they still made progress this year. You know, they beat the Boston Celtics in the second round, which, you know, pretty much nobody expected you to do. And you got productive seasons out of Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, OG Anunoby. You got very productive seasons out of guys like that. I think what they should be doing is prioritizing depth. And I trust the front office to make those decisions correctly. 9 times out of 10, they've pressed the right buttons. And I say 9 times out of 10 because, you know, there's a couple exceptions. I think we can agree, the McHale trade for 5 first-round picks might have been, kind of not the right button. Maybe not necessarily the player, but the package that we sent to Brooklyn in return. You know, and you could also look at a couple other small moves like the Evan Fournier contracts and things like that. But they've quickly fixed those, right? With the trades for, Josh Hart and OG Anunoby, etc., etc. So they usually have pressed the right buttons, and I trust the front office to do that. Same goes with the head coaching search. You know, they obviously fired Tom Thibodeau, and I know that was a very unpopular move amongst NBA fans. I think a lot of Knicks fans felt that it needed to happen, but a lot of NBA fans felt otherwise. I trust this front office, though, to make that decision to hire the right guy and lead this team to a title contender. Now, I know, back to Giannis here, I know a lot of people have been saying that if we acquire Giannis, we're instantly a title favorite, whatever. I don't disagree with that. Of course we would be. I mean, Giannis and Brunson together, that would be an insane duo. But you're sacrificing depth for another superstar. And what was the Knicks' biggest issue this past season? Depth. They didn't have any depth. They didn't have bench depth. And, while they could have easily played some of these bench guys who were providing an impact, you could blame part of that on the coach. They weren't necessarily the most talented players either. I mean, your bench mostly consisted of Deuce McBride, Cameron Payne, Landry Shamet, Preston Achua, Jericho Sims for most of the year, and then he got traded, and then Mitchell Robinson, when he came back, was off the bench, and then he eventually started in the playoffs. So, I mean, it wasn't like the worst situation in the world, but it wasn't very good either. They were dead last in bench points this year. It wasn't that, obviously Tibbs not playing the bench a whole lot plays a part in that, but also I think the talent level. I mean, those guys are not necessarily like world beaters off the bench, you know what I mean? And Deuce McBride being a 6-man averaging about 8 points per game, I feel like that's misusing him a little bit. I don't think he's necessarily meant to be like a lead guard off the bench. I don't think he did bad in that role, but I think he'd be much better as like a secondary spot up shooter, whether that's in the starting lineup or even off the bench as the 7th guy. I think he'd be much better in an off-ball role. I don't think he's terrible at facilitating an offense, but I don't think that's his strength. So I think if the Knicks used him in that kind of role, then he would produce so much better. And that's why I think they need to prioritize depth. Go after guys go after some bench guys or even some guys that can be thrown into the starting lineup that can provide you a deeper roster and a chance to win. Because I really do think this starting 5 is good enough to win. I do. I think the starting 5 of Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, OJ Anunoby, Karl-Anthony Towns, and whether that's Josh Hart or somebody else, because I know there's a lot of debate about whether or not Hart should be off the bench, which I agree with. I think he should come off the bench. But even if he is starting, I still think that is a good enough starting 5 to win. I really do. That is a very talented group. I don't think you have to, sacrifice 2 of those guys or even 3 of those guys to go get Giannis. I don't think you need to do that. I don't get me wrong. I would love Giannis in New York. I think he's an awesome player, and I think, he's obviously a perennial MVP candidate. He's always in the conversation every single year. He's one of the best defensive players in the league, along with being a 30-point per game scorer. So, yeah, I would love him. But the price that he's going to come with is lofty, extremely lofty. I mean, you're asking basically to give up the whole team, and I don't think the Knicks have enough assets to where they can just make a trade like that without gutting the roster. As I've been saying, because you trade away a lot of those picks for Mikal Bridges, which I already acknowledged was not a good move. I would not be trading 5 first-round picks for Bridges, but that's what they did. That is the reality. So you kind of have to live with the consequence. And when you look at also the other situation the Knicks have had, I don't think they need to rush their timeline a little bit. They have a 2 to 3 year championship window. You don't have to, rush it by immediately going after, the guy that might not even be available for trade. We don't even know for certain if Giannis will be available for trade this summer. It's still unconfirmed that he will be on the market, because for all we know, he could easily tell the Milwaukee Bucks that he wants to stay, or at least, stay another year and then go on from there. Because, Giannis loves Milwaukee. He's been there for, about 12 years now. He's been there for a very long time, and he's obviously their franchise player, one of the best players to ever even play for that franchise, if not the best. So, it's a complicated situation. It is. But he's still a very talented player. I would love him in New York, but it's going to be such a huge price. And, I want to segue into the next part of this, the head coaching search, as I alluded to. The Knicks right now obviously do not have a head coach. They fired Tom Thibodeau, and it's been about a few days, almost a week now since they did that, and they still don't have a head coach. And we've seen some names come off the board already. We've seen Jay Wright come off the board. We've seen Michael Malone off the board. Rick Pitino off the board, and a couple other candidates who they haven't really expressed interest in. You know what I mean? The only guys that I've been seeing that they are rumored to kind of be somewhat interested in is like Johnny Bryant, Luke Walton, Mike Brown, and a couple other guys. Chris Finch as well. A bunch of different guys. They don't have their eyes clearly on one set target. They've been talking about Jason Kidd, but Jason Kidd, it seems like, after the report came out yesterday, that it looks like they're going to get denied a chance to interview him. So I don't think they're going to be able to get Jason Kidd, so they're going to probably have to pivot somewhere else. And Ryan, what I want to ask you is, if the Knicks were to hire a head coach that were to really entice Giannis, do you think there's any remote possibility that he could force his way to New York, kind of like how Mikal Bridges did last summer?
I don't, because unlike Mikal Bridges, the New York Knicks actually had an offer that the Nets had to take, If you're the Milwaukee Bucks, you are only going to afford Giannis so much leniency with where he wants to go. If the Oklahoma City Thunder are offering, a package with, let's say, Isaiah Hartenstein and a bunch of picks, Isaiah Hartenstein for the money, maybe have to throw in another player for the money, and a bunch of picks. I'm not saying that Isaiah Hartenstein's better than Cat. I think that that isn't the league-wide perception. But for the Milwaukee Bucks, what do you want to build around? Like a bunch of pick swaps? Or do you want first-round picks? Like, do you want 5 first-round picks, or do you want Cat and some scraps? And I think that if you're the Bucks, you want picks. The NBA is not a sport where player for player trades tend to happen a lot. It's usually just salary fillers. The reason that everyone wants this to happen for the Knicks is because obviously Cat swapping him out for Giannis makes the Knicks better. That's a no-brainer. It makes sense for us. It doesn't make sense for them. That's the reality of it. The Spurs, think of what they can offer from a pick perspective. The young players they can offer you to restart, kickstart, or rebuild. I mean, there's just more on the table from other teams that is just far more attractive than what the Knicks are offering. Maybe someone could argue that, well, they could flip Cat to another team. Well, who? Because you've got to flip $50 million of salary. You've got to find a very specific situation. And look, the Timberwolves got 2 players, one of them a rental in Randall, who is eligible for an extension. The other is a quality role player in Dante DiVincenzo, and believe a first-round pick. I think that's what they got. I don't know if there's anything else added to that deal. What would a rental player, a solid role player, and a first-round pick do for the Milwaukee Bucks if they were to flip Cat on the market? And what is the pick compensation equivalent of that? Is anyone offering up 4 or 5 first-round picks and going, all right, I'm going all in for Karl Anthony Towns? He's a good player, but I think he's flawed enough that no one's going to do that. Especially, and with the CBA, there are not a lot of teams that are going to be willing to take on that financial commitment. You know, I actually think he'd be a good fit for a team with a really good defense that struggles spacing the floor. You look at a team like, Houston, but they kind of already have that, like, defensively flawed center. I mean, Sengun's gotten better defensively, but, like, you have Sengun. Are you going to rather, like, rely and hope that Sengun becomes that guy, or are you going to just take a $50 million Karl Anthony Towns and hope that he elevates your team to that next level? I don't. There just aren't a lot of logical fits outside of a team kind of like the Knicks for Cat. So I don't know. I just don't. I don't see how this makes any sense for the Bucks. So I don't see him forcing his way to the Knicks. I think he would love to be a New York Knick. I think the idea of playing in New York, playing next to Jalen Brunson, these things excite him. But at the end of the day, why are we sitting here pretending like playing with Victor Wembanyama, guy 7'6", should probably be banned from the NBA. You shouldn't allow a 7'6" guy who can shoot play this damn sport. It's not fair. That's pretty enticing too, no? Played for OKC, the MVP point guard, a guy who led the league in scoring and is also a premium defender at the position. Would you like to play alongside him? A team that I still think they're going to win the finals. I know they're down 1-0 in the series, but I do believe they will win the NBA finals. A team that might be a title champion by the time he's available for trade conversations this summer. Is that not enticing as well? I mean, I feel like people are pretending like, and I'm not saying this to disparage the Knicks, but people are pretending like the Knicks are the only attractive destination. New York City's cool. I like New York City. Don't get me wrong. Giannis has lived in Milwaukee his entire career, as a pro. I think he could handle living in Oklahoma City. I think he'd be fine living in San Antonio. I don't think that the guy's life is... If he wants to live in New York, he could still do it. You know what I mean? He is... You see him in New York all the time. He's still in the Bucks. Doesn't need to be a Knick to go to New York. Doesn't need to be a Laker to go to LA. Doesn't need to be a Celtic to go to Boston. He can do all these things and play for the team he wants to play for. And for the Bucks, they're going to tell him probably, hey, we love you, appreciate everything you've done for us. We are not taking a bad offer so we can accommodate you. We're taking the best offer. If you don't want to go to a certain team, fine. We're still taking that offer. It is what this is a business at the end of the day. I don't think the Bucks are going to, again, take some lesser offer just to make Giannis happy. Why do they have to make him happy at that point? He's gone. What's the point at that point? You know what I mean? If I'm trading a player, do I care if they're happy over there? If you're not happy over there, play out your contract, then go hit free agency, and then go play for who you want to play for. That's not our problem. That's not the Bucks' problem. So I don't see that happening. I'll even say this, Dylan, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Giannis has a better chance of staying with the Bucks for the next 2 years than he does of being a New York Knick this year. That's where I'm at. I really think the odds of him being a Knick are incredibly low.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with that. I mean, I just don't see a realistic scenario where Giannis heads to New York. I just don't see it. I mean, we've been seeing all these rumors all the time. We've been seeing the rumors since as soon as last summer, and even during the regular season when we smoked the Bucks at home, and everyone said, "Oh, Giannis is upset, and that Giannis wants to leave." We've been hearing this nonstop, and it's the New York Knicks. We're always going to be hearing about rumors with superstars and all this stuff, and sometimes we end up landing the guy that we want, and 9 times out of 10 we don't. And this case, I think there is like a 0.5% chance that we even land Giannis at all. And the reason I even give it 0.5 is because in today's NBA, clearly you can never rule anything out anymore. We've seen players get traded out of nowhere. Example, Luka Doncic. So, anything could happen, of course, but I just don't think it's likely at all. And even if they do hire the right head coach that could entice Giannis, quote unquote, I don't think that'll change much. I don't. Maybe it'll look nice for us because they'll be like, oh, okay, they're an attractive destination still. They still have competitive head coaches. They still have a really good roster to field on the floor. But I don't think that's necessarily going to make Giannis go to the Bucks front office and say, trade me to the New York Knicks right now, please. I want to go over there. I don't think that's going to happen. Don't get me wrong. I would love for that to happen if Giannis would love to play in New York, but it's just not going to happen. It isn't. So what I was saying before, and I'll say it again, focus on depth pieces. I think that is the number one key. I think that is the absolute must that you should do this summer. I understand there's some people that think getting Giannis is a must. I don't necessarily think it's a must. I really don't think it is. And the reason I say that, again, their starting five is very talented. That group can win ball games. We saw time and time again that starting five be one of the most dominant groups in the entire NBA. Of course, now during the playoffs, there were times where they were terrible. They had negative net rating during the postseason, all that stuff. I get it. There's flaws. But there's simple solutions too if you add depth and, of course, the coaching change. The coach played a huge role in the starting five struggles. Those guys got tired by the end of the playoffs. You could see it. You could see in Jalen Brunson's face. He was exhausted. He was like the only Nick, really, who kind of had a pulse for most of that Pacers series to begin with. You know what I mean? So when you look at it that way, and you can get some of these other bench guys more involved and stuff like that with a new head coach coming in, and even some of these, these sophomore players, the guys who were rookies last year that should surely see some more action this upcoming season. You know what I mean? I think having depth and getting the right guys to kind of fill in those roles that you didn't really have this past season can make a huge difference. I really do. And plus, the main point that I really want to make here, the East is going to get a lot worse next year. A lot worse. I mean, the Boston Celtics are not going to be nearly as good because Jason Tatum's going to be out, and that team can't afford to keep those guys together either. So one of those guys at least is going to have to go. And, the Cleveland Cavaliers, who knows if they're going to win 64 games again? Who knows if they're going to be as dominant as they were this past season? The Indiana Pacers are going to be good again. I fully expect them to be in the top 3 of the Eastern Conference. I expect the Knicks to be top 3 in the Eastern Conference. And maybe Detroit will sneak its way into top 3 as well because those guys are building off a really good season. There's be some other teams out there like, maybe the Bucks will find a way into a play-in spot, but I don't think they're going to make the playoffs outright, especially with Damian Lillard missing the entire season. Despite the fact that they'll probably still have Giannis, I don't think they're necessarily going to be like this crazy title contender. The East is wide open next year. I mean, wide open. And what the Knicks showed this year is that they can beat anybody when they are clicking. And the coach, I think the coach played a big role in them not clicking. We've seen all the reports, coming out recently about, the Knicks being some of those players not really liking Tom Thibodeau as much as they would have hoped, and even somebody saying that they weren't sure if they could still play for this team if Thibodeau was around next year. I have a feeling I know who that player was, but I'm not gonna outright say it on here, but I think we kind of know who it is. But either way, besides all of that, I think just bottom line, you go get some depth pieces, get some guys that can, fill in the front court, get some guys that can defend, especially do that, but get a guy that can score off the bench. I've been seeing some people say the name Kobe White, and I'm intrigued by that. I know he can't defend really at all, but he can score. And if he can come in the game and drop a bunch of points, or even start, because he's good enough to start. If he can do all that, you're in a good position. I do. I don't think he's the one solution. I think you would have to get him and a bunch of other guys that can defend, or, get some small free agents that can defend or whatever, or even have some of the sophomores come up and play some more action, right? But one way or the other, you make moves like that, impactful moves that are not necessarily like mind-blowing moves, but decent moves. You can go back to the Eastern Conference Finals next year. You can win an NBA title next year. The East, like I said, the East is going to be wide open. I understand when I say that notion, some people might say, oh, well, if it's wide open, why not be the best of the best and go get Giannis? The thing is, if you go get Giannis, you are going to be sacrificing a large portion of your roster to go get him. Yes, he is that good of a player and that impactful of a player, but we see how it's working out in Milwaukee right now with Damian Lillard. Everyone thought Damian Lillard and Giannis were going to absolutely terrorize the Eastern Conference, right? They haven't really done that as a duo, and now Damian Lillard is out. So, it's obviously Jalen Brunson is better than 2025 Damian Lillard, yes, but still, that's besides the point. Like, you know, you can't always trust these like big twos or big threes, whatever you want to call it, and then have a bunch of scraps on the bench or in the second unit. We just saw this year a team run out one of the better looking starting fives on paper, but a horrible bench, and we're not talking about them in the finals right now when we could be. So, I don't think you need to make a hasty move. I don't think you need to make a trade just to make a trade. I think they made good moves over the summer. Yes, I question the Bridges trade. Yes, but I do think that has the potential still to end up working out because with the new coach, I'm intrigued to see how Bridges will perform because I do think he's a good player. And of course, Cat as well. I'm intrigued to see how he will perform under a new coach. I just don't think it was working out with Tom Thibodeau. I think making the coaching change and going after bench depth is the more important key than trading the entire farm for Giannis. That is really all I got to say about that. I want to give you an opportunity, though, to kind of give one more final thought on Giannis and even the head coaching search and any other impacts that could become about with this before we wrap the episode up.
Yeah, I wanted to add on real quick. You talk about the importance of depth and the things that Knicks needed. When you bring in a Giannis, you number one have to export a lot to get him. And I would be willing to. I want to clarify, like I do think Giannis and Brunson, it's worth the upside of that duo is worth figuring out the rest of the depth. But my biggest priorities are figuring out how to get this team to gel better, how to get more ball movement, figuring out the spacing. I think that, again, I don't mean to target Josh Hart here. This is not really a Josh Hart specific thing. He's not a good NBA player. This is the problem. It's more his fit with the starting five as the fifth guy. It's not the best fit in the world. I think you need a more dynamic shooter at that position or just straight up a center. It has to either be a situation where Karl-Anthony Towns is playing the four or Karl-Anthony Towns or that fifth guy is a defensive-minded guy who can shoot. This team, as you mentioned, displayed a lot of really good things this year from a talent perspective. Jalen Brunson continues to look like the kind of guy that you can win a title with. There were some really good Cat performances in the postseason, the kind of performances where you're like, hey, if you can just take over, man, and stay consistent, we could be talking about someone who can be that beloved number two. And then you look at, even OG Anunoby at times, the scoring leap, the scoring volume increased. It felt like he was just a more dynamic scorer of the basketball than we had seen in recent years. And the last guy I'd like to point out here is Mikal Bridges because I feel like there's still more. There's still more for him to accomplish in New York. He is too good of a defensive player. He is too skilled of a scorer for him to have performed the way he did this year. I am not saying that Mikal Bridges is going to be some 30-point per game guy or whatever, but can he be a little more efficient? Can we get better defense? Like, can he be a more impactful player? I definitely think that's possible. I don't think that coaching was perfect for what they were trying to do. And I think that as we get into the weeds of the offseason, as we start seeing some movement across the league, we're really going to get a better look, number one, as to what's available. And number two, I think we're going to see the Knicks, as you mentioned, pivot more towards, hey, how do we flesh out this lineup? How do we maximize this lineup? How do we flesh out this bench? How do we bring in a coach who schematically is going to maximize this team's upside? How are we going to be a more forward-facing organization, a more forward-facing team? Look, Oklahoma City, for example, and I know that I guess I spend basically every podcast waxing poetic about that kind of team archetype. The team that we saw last year in Boston, those two teams to me are the teams that are going to win in this new CBA. Great depth, perfect lineup synergy-wise, an offensive scheme that is going to produce a ton of good results, and a defensive scheme that'll do the same thing. This team was just not optimized. And there were Tom Thibodeau years where I did think he optimized this roster. I thought last year was a great example of that. I thought last year was actually a great example of the importance of synergy, the importance of having guys who fit well together. That Brunson, DiVincenzo, Anunoby, Randall, Hartenstein lineup is, I believe, still the best lineup the New York Knicks have had in the Jalen Brunson era. And I think that that's not, in terms of just talent, I don't think that's true. I think that I'll take the Brunson, Cat, Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart 5-man, and I'll take that in terms of raw talent. But those pieces need to click. The reason that lineup worked and the Knicks went on a run is because that group clicked. That group, it was perfect. There weren't spacing issues. Brunson could operate freely in the paint. Randall could do the same. There was enough spacing where teams would have to constantly rotate around in order to cover their man. And on the interior, there were no defensive flaws. Yes, Brunson and Randall are bad defensive players or are defensive liabilities, but Hartenstein gave you rim protection, and Anunoby gave you perimeter defense. Randall's big enough that he can be a help defender. We know that Brunson takes a lot of charges, and then DiVincenzo was a pesky defender, not a great one, but a pesky one. It's about finding that final piece, right? It's about finding that guy who gives them the spacing that they need and potentially helps with the rim protection. I think it's either A, a center, or B, again, a 3-and-D guy. I'm very curious to see how Leon Rose chooses to handle this, but yeah, I think it's more about where the synergy is going to be at and what schematically they're going to be able to do this season, not as much which star they're going to go after.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's that simple. Team depth is very important. I mean, we've emphasized that. And, I'd have to agree with you about what you said about the 2024 team. I mean, yes, talent-wise, that team is not better than, what we just threw out there this year. But what you said, those guys clicked. I mean, that's why that team went so far despite all the injury problems. I mean, they were missing basically everybody by the time the season was over. But the reason that they were able to make it competitive still is because of the way those guys played together. Those guys played hard. They fit well together. What you said, there wasn't spacing problems. There was so much free-flowing offense. There was a lot that they could do. Switchable defense as well. A lot of things went right for them that year. It just was unfortunate that a horrible injury situation, which is oftentimes out of their control, ended up ruining their season. I firmly believe that team could have, I don't think that team was going to beat Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals that year. I think they would have lost them still, but I think they could have pushed them to 6 or 7 games if they were actually healthy. And unfortunately, we never got to see that happen. And if they were to end up beating Indiana in Game 7 somehow, despite all those injuries, they probably get swept by Boston with all those injuries because Brunson would have been out, Randall was still out, Anunoby out, all those guys out. So, it is what it is. We can only forecast how that would have went so much. But, bottom line with this episode before we do wrap it up, I mean, Giannis would be awesome to have in New York, but I don't think it happens, one. And two, I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I don't think they're in a position where you have to, how do I put this? You do want to win right now. You do. You want to win right now. But at the same time, you're not in a position right now where you have to, trade everybody to go get Giannis because you already have a group on the floor right now that can win a championship. You have a starting 5 that is capable of reaching the finals or winning a championship. We saw this year, despite all of the dysfunction that was going on between the starting 5 and the head coach and all that, despite all of that, they were 2 wins away from the NBA Finals, despite all of that. So something tells me right there that if you can keep this core together, get these guys to click, get a better head coach that can get some more offensive creation and have some more creativity on both ends of the floor, I think this team can go places. I do. Obviously, it is still a long offseason ahead. The NBA Finals aren't even finished yet, and there's still a lot to go. We still have to deal with free agency and, of course, the trade market and all that stuff. The NBA draft as well, which, for the Knicks, it's not like the biggest thing this year is the draft. They only have one draft pick right now, and it's the 50th overall pick. So whoever they draft is probably not really going to play a whole lot, but that's besides the point. I mean, we got all that stuff ahead of us still, and we're talking about Giannis right now, 1 week after our season's over, which is natural. You hear rumors all the time once a team's season ends, but I think where the Knicks stand right now, they don't have to go get Giannis to absolutely win a title. I think they can. I think if you were to get him, yeah, you'd be great for a title chance because you have Brunson and Giannis. That would be an unreal duo. But I also don't think they have to 100% do it. I think they can still win with the group that they currently have. And if things change, things change. Maybe they feel differently about Cat, or maybe they feel differently about Bridges because he is extension eligible. Maybe they feel like they should move on from Mitchell Robinson. Maybe they feel like some of those parts of the core need to get broken up. And if they do, then that's where you look ahead to Giannis or KD or any other superstar that may become available. But, aside from all that stuff, we've been talking about Giannis now for about a half hour, so I do think this is a good place now to kind of wrap the episode up. We really hope you guys did enjoy this video. Let us know what you think about Giannis and whether or not he's going to actually end up coming to the Knicks in the comments section below, because we would love to talk to you guys about that. You can follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course, this YouTube page that you just watched the video on. You can follow me and Ryan's personal Twitter accounts. They're above our heads. You can also listen to the audio version of this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Make sure you give a 5-star rating on those. And we'll see you guys in the next episode of Fireside Knicks. Peace out, and let's go Knicks.